everyone, and welcome to day 2 of the BFI Future Film Festival 2021. My name is Alex, and I'm the festival programmer and producer. Our panel discussion today has been curated in collaboration with the Make Film History project, which makes available archive films from the BBC, BFI National Archive, Irish Film Institute, and Northern Ireland Screen for educational use by young filmmakers. And today, we'll be discussing how you can use archive footage to inspire and inform new stories. We have our entire festival team working behind the scenes today. So my colleague Noel will be managing the chat box during this session. If you have any questions that are not necessarily directly related to this session, but kind of questions about the Future Film Festival, any of our upcoming events, or maybe more generic questions about the BFI or Film Academy, then please pop those in the chat box, and Noel will be answering them throughout the session. And yeah, I see you all introducing yourselves as well. That's great. Let us know who you are and where you're joining from. But if you have any specific questions for our guests today about today's session, then please put those questions not in the chat box, but in the Q&A box on the bottom of your screens. And my colleague Winnie will be managing those questions throughout the session. So you can start popping them in there now. And we'll devote the last 15 minutes of the session to your questions, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. Our session today will be hosted by Colin McAuliffe, who is a researcher for Make Film History project, but he has also curated a number of archive-related exhibitions for the Whitechapel Gallery, Institut Français, and many more. Just before I hand over to Colin, I wanted to let you know that today's session is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on the BFI YouTube channel after the festival, so in about a couple of weeks' time. So if you've missed anything today, or if you just want to watch the session again, you will be able to. Keep an eye out on our social channels, and we'll let you know as soon as that's up there. And now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Colin, who will introduce today's guest to you. Enjoy the session.
Alex, thanks a million. It's really, really fantastic to see so many people here attending this session, which we've very deliberately called Archive Fever, because we really do want to get across the incredible creative potential involved in working with film archives. So my name is Colin McAuliffe, and with my colleague Shane O'Sullivan, who was also here this afternoon, we're working on this project called Make Film History, which, as Alex says, opens up the film archives from the BBC, from the BFI, from the Irish Film Institute, and from Northern Ireland Screen for creative reuse by young filmmakers. So Shane, my colleague, is going to give a quick introduction to our scheme and what we do. So Shane, do you want to maybe just take the lead?
Yeah, thanks, Colin. So, and good morning, or sorry, good afternoon, everybody. It's thrilling to see so many of you here. So what I'm going to do is just share my screen, just to tell you a little bit more about the Make Film History project and how you can access some of the archive material we have available. So this is a project which we do with the 3 archive partners that we've discussed already. Over 200 films are available through the scheme. You can see 69 higher education institutions have signed up so far. And now what we're doing is basically expanding it to young filmmakers from primary school right up to before you step into the industry, and making these films available to you. So I'm just going to show you a couple of tabs on the website. It's archivesforeducation.com is the website that you want to go to, which we'll pop in the chat. And you can see that they go from kind of early 20th century kind of silent film, the 1919 influenza epidemic, right up through kind of the use of face coverings in World War II, right up to more kind of youth culture oriented titles from the 60s and 70s. So you can see there's a range of films on display here. We've begun to organize them by theme. So just as one particular theme, you can see music related documentaries from the archives, starting with kind of mods and rockers in the early 60s, right up to early hip hop in the late 80s, and appearances from The Clash and The Specials in various BBC documentaries, and also a documentary on the Rock Against Racism movement that you may have seen in the recent feature doc White Riot. So all of these are free resources that can be accessed through schools, colleges, training programs like the BFI Film Academy. So if you're interested and you're on one of those programs, just ask your lecturer to sign up to the scheme. It's free and they get access to the 200 films. And then basically, if you go on the website and you're interested in a title, all you need to do is click through to watch the title on one of the BBC iPlayer or the BFI player, and then ask your tutor for access to a ProRes copy of the film, which you could then use. You can creatively respond to with something you shoot yourself, and then intercut an excerpt of up to 2 minutes in your own film. So that's basically how the scheme works. I saw already in the chat, some ideas about where you can find free archive, as well as the archive material that we offer through the scheme. There are also a range of resources on the FAQ page of the website where you can access free footage for your projects. So, obviously we're aware in lockdown, archive is a great resource to tap into to give you ideas when there are restrictions on filming. So please do have a browse of the website after today's session to give you some starting points. So I just wanted to introduce the website and the resources, but I don't I want to give Jeremy as much time to talk about his work and his approach to creative reuse of archive, and then hopefully that'll inspire you to dip into resources that we offer at the end of today's session. So that's all from me. I'll stop sharing and hand back to Colin. Thanks a lot.
Shane, thanks a million. We're doing this under the BFI Future Film Festival. We would really just like to thank as well Alex and Kieran and everybody for facilitating us. So we're really happy to have this opportunity to present this talk by Jeremy Deller. So, I mean, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure very few of you don't know, Jeremy is a Turner Prize winning artist filmmaker who very effectively and very deftly uses archive footage in a lot of his work. His most recent film is called Everybody in the Place, which is a brilliant cultural history of Britain through rave culture and the political turmoil of Thatcher's Britain in the 1980s. So we're really, really happy that Jeremy is going to give this talk to you today. So I'll just hand over to Jeremy now, if he's ready.
Well, thank you for asking me to do this. This is a subject that's very close to my heart, because in a way I was raised on TV as a kid. TV was everything to me, and a lot of the documentaries you have in your in this block, I remember seeing as a child, and they had a massive influence upon me. And I think I can also say that someone else would have been watching them at the same time as it would have been Steve McQueen. And I think they had a massive influence on him. And without a doubt, I suspect that he would have looked at the archives that you've been looking at or will be looking at to give him an idea of how to make, especially the recent films he's been making, ones you saw on the BBC. So archive does have many uses. Of course, you can include it in your films and clips, but also you can look at it to get ideas about the past or get ideas about how to make a film. I think for me, I always loved history, and I see archive as history, basically. It's just a piece of history. It's social history, and it is so rich, and I can look at it forever. I mean, that's almost one of the problems when I was sent all these films to look at. I just thought, well, that's my next months of just watching all these films. So I was very excited to look at them. But I think, I was taught history at school in not a particularly good way. And I think that's really detrimental, really, because history really matters. And also the ownership of history matters, especially recent history, our kind of shared history, you could say. I was taught in a very traditional way at school. I loved history, but I was taught so badly, but also I was taught history in a certain way that gave me just a single viewpoint about the country. And I think that was, for me personally, potentially quite damaging. I think, if you're taught history at school in a certain way, we were sort of taught in a way meant to believe that Britain was the greatest country in the world, there was no colonial history, all these things, it actually made you have the wrong view about Britain. And this is well known about the school I went to. I went to school with Nigel Farage. He was 2 years above me. And he was taught history in the same way that I was, but he kind of believed the stories he was told. So history matters. And at the moment, in Britain, history, and so the archives from history has become a battlefield, as I'm sure you're aware. You know, we are in the middle of a number of culture wars around our history and around how we interpret it and around our culture. And so in a way, it's never mattered more really than to look at these kinds of things, look at this footage from the 20th century to work out how we got to where we are now. So I think it's a really great time for us to be doing this. So you could argue that archive is the raw material of history. So I'm just going to talk about how I've used archive, how it's inspired me, how you may see it in the work, how you might not see it in the work. And then I'm going to talk about a clip that I've selected just to sort of discuss why that clip was so resonant for me. But if I could just have the first slide, please. Thank you. This is, when I was growing up, when I was 18, I saw something on television, which now is archive. It wasn't archive at the time, but it's archive now. And you'll see it later in this talk. I saw a riot, basically, or a battle. It wasn't even a riot. It was a battle between the police and striking miners. That's a police siren you might hear outside where I live on cue. But it was this amazing footage that stuck with me through my life. I mean, when I saw it, I couldn't believe what I was looking at. But it was news. It wasn't something from the past, but it looked like something from the past. It looked like something from the medieval Britain. It was a group of men being pursued up a hill by the police, like an army basically pursuing the people up a hill with dogs, with horses, and it was part of the miners' strike, and it was a very famous confrontation. So that image, that footage basically stuck with me. Then it was news, now it's archive. So you'll be looking at things on TV now, but in 20 years' time, you might be revisiting as something that you, at the time you knew there's something interesting about that footage, or something to you is personally important to you, or you couldn't quite work out what was going on, but maybe in 5, 10, 15 years' time, you might have an opportunity to work it out through using that archive, which is what happened to me. So this is a photograph from the day. So this is archive. Archive isn't just film, obviously, it's photography. This is a photograph of a striking miner, obviously talking to a policeman. No, it's just, you know, it's just a photograph, but actually, like with a lot of archive, there's a lot going on in this picture. If you sort of unpick it and decode it, he's pointing at a certain policeman, because obviously that policeman has done something that he didn't like, probably arrested someone in a violent manner. Also, what you see is on the cap, on the helmets, there's an insignia, which I think might be the Metropolitan Police. And the Metropolitan Police was sent up to the north of England to be quite rough with the miners, because they had no connection to the north, they had no connection to mining culture and so on. So they were really the police that were the most violent and the most feared by the miners. So if I could have the next image, please. So what do you do with this in your mind? What I did was I recreated the battle that I'd seen as a teenager. I'd had a public event and I restaged it as a battle with 1,000 people playing miners and police. And this is a still from it, which looks like archive, because it's not like a very freshly taken photograph in a way. There's camera shake, and that's because the photographer who took the picture, I suspect, was quite nervous being around this, because we were recreating a riot as a public event and a film. And that film has no archive in it, but it's all based on archive. Without the archive, without the footage we'd seen of this riot, this battle, and the accounts we'd read, we wouldn't have had a film, and the people we'd met. So for me, it was very important to get accuracy, and we did that through archive. So maybe you'll make a film, like I was saying, but that uses archive extensively, but you don't see it in the finished product. So it's, in a way, it's all the reference material that you might need. And also archive can just tell you so much about what was going on at the time, in terms of just how people looked, but in how they spoke, but just the whole atmosphere of a situation. So that was a big work that I made in 2001. If I can have the next image, please. So I like history, and in a way, I play with history. Here is literally playing with history. This is not an archive as such, but it's sort of a cover version, literally. This is a cover version of Stonehenge that I made, which has a bouncy castle, so young people can go on it and bounce around on it. Anyone can go on it, not just young people. And this is a photograph taken when it toured Britain in 2012. Some of you may have even seen it or gone on it at the time, because it went around London and it went around the UK. So even though, for me, in a way, that's saying that history, don't be afraid of history, really. You can take it and you can use it as you want. And likewise with archive. When I say history today, I'm also saying archive. It's something that you can use and you can change and sort of have fun with as well. And I think that's really important, to not be intimidated by it. If I can have the next slide. So for me, I am always eternally grateful to people, as we all should be, who just, for whatever reason, just pick up a camera and just do something with it. This is a still, and you'll see some footage from this still in a minute. And this is just people who make archive, not for television purposes, or they just do it because they think it might be interesting, or they have a view of what's happening at the time as something that's going to be interesting in the future, maybe. This still is shot by is of a film of a nightclub in 1990, and it's shot by an 18-year-old, and you'll see in a minute what else he shot. He shot the queue for the nightclub, and then he shot in the club itself, and he did it in a really good way, very steady camera, just walking around with a camcorder, pretty low quality compared to what you could do now with a phone. But this was at a moment when people weren't filming these things really. So that's the other thing about archive, is that someone makes a little film like this in 1990, doesn't really think much of it. It has some kind of interest for people who are in it maybe, but as the years go on, this becomes more and more important. So it becomes not just a bit of film, it becomes archive, then it becomes cultural and social history. And every year that goes past, it becomes more and more important and more precious. What is amazing is the beginning shot of this film, of this footage that he shot, was just the queue. So it goes right along the queue, and you see everyone that's going to be in the club, and you recognize them in the queue, but you see what they're wearing, you get an idea of how old they are, and it tells you just so much about what was going on at the time. So this idea that what is interesting about archive is that actually a lot of it is about social history. And you might think, oh, an interview with a politician is really interesting. And it might be, but in 20 years' time, that interview might have very little value. But an interview of someone on the street talking about the politician or talking about politics in 20 years' time has much more value than the interview with the politician. So that sort of formal news often is much less interesting later on than what people were actually thinking. And I suppose that was the idea when I was studying history at school. Was I was very unhappy about learning about kings and queens and leaders. I just wanted to know how people lived. I won't say normal or regular people. That's a term I really dislike, but just people who had to sort of make ends meet, and the majority of the population, let me put it like that. So social history. So in a way, what I wasn't learning in history at school is what you get from archive often. You just get people who are more or less anonymous, a lot of them, talking about their lives. And in a way, it's so much more articulate than what a politician or even a historian can tell you. Because basically what a historian is doing is just looking at the archive and then writing about it. But if you go direct to the archive, you just can learn so much. And we'll look at that in a minute. So this footage is something that I remember. I remember clubs like this. I mean, it's nearly 30 years ago now. But for someone to, like I said, to walk around a nightclub and film it throughout an evening is actually doing a massive service for history. If I could have the next slide, please. So I was asked to make a film about dance music, which was mentioned in the introduction. And it was something that I realized is a huge, huge burden almost, because that's a shared history. And the shared history of dance music, people hold very close to them because it's about their youth. It's something that is very special to them. And everyone has their own particular story about this moment. And so I was asked to make a story about this moment in British history from the mid-80s to the early 90s. And I realized that I had to do it in a way that maybe was slightly different from before. So I did it in a variety of ways. Often when you see archive used in music documentaries, it's used quite sparingly because it's expensive, or it's not used as much because the talking heads, the people talking about the footage, get more time than the footage itself. Either that or the footage is used and you don't really know what it is you're looking at. You don't know where it was done, what the date was, anything like that. And that's massively frustrating to me because in a way, all you really want to look at is the original footage with a little bit of chat between it, maybe. You don't even want chat over it because you want the original sound as much as possible. So when I was asked to make a film about this subject, which is a subject very dear to me, but also a subject that I'd lived through in a way, because I was born at a time where I was a sort of young person during this era, I realized it had to be done in a certain way. And so there are two devices for this, really. One was I did use a lot of archive, but I had very long clips of archive. Nothing was under a minute or minute and a half. So what would happen was there'd be some discussion and then the archive would start and it would be quite long. So you could really get into it. You didn't feel if someone was going to be talking over it or something was going to be edited in a weird way. Because like I said, often archive is used as wallpaper, often. And that's something that I just can't bear. And the second thing was that I realized that the problem with a lot of filmmakers and the way they use archive, especially about music, is you have a lot of people who are remembering something that happened in the past and talking about it in a certain way. And they become very nostalgic, or they're telling stories basically that maybe are sort of legends almost. So I wanted to make something that was a little bit more fresh. So the film is actually set in a classroom, very recognizable classroom in London in a way. And it's me talking to a group of young people about the archive, about Britain. And the archive is very similar to some of the archive you've been looking at. It's maybe a little bit later because it's mid-80s onwards, but it was me showing these young people Britain in the mid-80s to the early 90s. Basically Britain before they were born, and Britain before most of you were born. And for them, it was quite shocking because they might not have known about the miners' strike or the traveller movement, all these big parties. For a number of reasons, they might not have known about it. And so for them, it was the first time they may have seen this footage. And so I was showing them the footage, talking about it, and then getting their reactions to the footage and to seeing what they made of it. So I was really getting their reactions to archive and getting their immediate reactions. So for example, something happened. We looked at a piece of footage from the miners' strike, and one of the young people asked me, was the miners' strike about climate change? Which it wasn't. It was about political power, basically, and changes in politics and business. But for me, that was very interesting because the archive was being viewed on with the eyes of now. And so it gave a totally fresh perspective to the archive, but also to the history of that time. So for me, I think it's always good to use archive, but maybe in a way, a creative way, is to maybe just show it to people and ask them what they make of it if they've not seen it before. And in a way, what I was trying to do with this, showing these different clips, was just to show the young people that Britain is not quite what you might think it is as a country. It's a bit more interesting, but also it's a bit more chaotic than you might think. And also the British history is not as straightforward as history books or maybe teachers even might want you to believe. The social history of Britain, which is basically the archive, of people just talking about stuff, doing things, it has changed Britain as much as the political history and the political archive. So for me, it was trying to show social change through music. This is a part of the film. This is still from the film where I just get some equipment from the 80s that was making rave music, and we just have a little breakout session. So like a little tutorial, like a practical class in making music. So that was around all the archive, and of course it costs a lot of money. So a lot of the budget went on archive and music. You know, music is archive as well. If you think about it, we don't really think of music as archive, but in a sense it is, because that too tells a story. And I think the story really is that the archive you have and music as well is what changed, is what pushed history. These movements, these songs, people doing things. Actually, there's a big relationship between popular culture and history. And that's what archive shows you. It shows you changes in society, and also how society was changing, maybe through young people, through popular culture, through music, through art, and so on. So it tells many stories at the same time. What I'm going to do in a second, not quite yet. Actually, you could cue it up, but not play it, because it's quite intense. I'm going to show you the trailer for the film. Okay, so the film has all the elements of the archive in it. Or maybe we'll talk about it in a minute when it's over, but it has all the elements of the archive that I was looking at. And as you'll see, it's not all about dance music, but it's about what was going on at the same time. You know, maybe the sort of adult world at the time, and then the world of youth at the time. And it has some footage of the queue as well that I was telling you about. So if we just play it, put the sound up, because the music is amazing for it, and enjoy this.
Come on! Come on! Come on! Come on! Come on! Come on!
Yes, so that's the trailer. The film isn't quite as intense as the trailer, but then they never are really, are they? But obviously the use of music, you saw the cue at the beginning. I mean, I'm not going to give you a masterclass on technical aspects of editing and using archive, but I was setting up a kind of expectancy, I suppose, some sort of tension, by having the introduction, and then it drops, and then it's pure dance. But the tension is building as the song builds. When you see there's a lot of footage of the police, because the police obviously were very interested in the rave scene. They were part of the miners' strike, clearly, and also they were, you know, it's not too strong a word, but they were persecuting the traveller movement, which was a movement of people who were travelling around Britain, kind of homeless people basically in trucks, who were setting up and having parties and just trying to live a sort of an alternative lifestyle. And they were very, very set upon by the police, literally and metaphorically, and by the law in Britain. And it's all related. Everything is connected basically in my film, because I don't think you can separate these things. I think history, social history, music, art are all connected. And through archive, you can show that, or just putting pieces of archive next to each other with music over is telling that story. You don't even have to say it. It's a part of the timeline, basically. So that's what I was trying to do with the film. So in fact, with the film I made, if you see it, you'll see that most of the archive, about half the archive is about dance music, and the other half is about politics and social history. Also, another thing like I said, that kind of really irritates me sometimes is when you see archive and you don't know what it is, because at the end of the film with the credits, it just like races by and you don't know what you've seen actually. So at the end of the film I made, for like the last 3 or 4 minutes, is a credit sequence where it shows the archive again in like a little thumbnail, and it says where it's from, who made it, and the date. And that's, for me, was really important. It's like having a footnotes in an essay, really, or references in an essay, because I don't think I can't really take documentaries seriously if they don't tell me really where they got that material from or what it is. It's not really honoring the work as well, especially with music and film. I think, you have to credit people, and it helps with the understanding. So that's something that is very important for me. So we're going to get onto the clip that I've selected for just to talk about what I believe, for me, the true sort of social and political use of archive is, and historical use. Let's use the word history. I think that's probably a better use, even though history is very disputed, especially at the moment, and our history is totally disputed. It's become a battlefield for ideas, but also ideologies. And something we want to talk about in a bit, this whole idea about British history, about the empire and colonialism and taking down statues, and what's the use of that? I think archive has a very important role to play in helping us to understand why we are here. And I think sometimes a piece of archive is made just to sort of show the public a situation in Britain, as it is in this clip in 1964 about immigration. But like I said, with a lot of archive, just like in the nightclub, with this archive, its meaning and importance just gets bigger and bigger and bigger to hear from someone their direct first-hand experience of living in Britain. So what may have been made for a documentary that was shown once in 1964, we will look at this again 57 years later, and it will tell us so much about why we have to make certain decisions about British history, about our attitudes to immigration. And it's just telling us so much use and value from that one interview that was made. It's a very melancholic. A lot of films around this time are quite melancholic when they're talking about race and immigration. I mean, melancholic, maybe that's a kind of too much poetic a word, but they're incredibly sad when you watch them. And they're often about that sort of the great sort of trick, as I would call it, about how a lot of people were encouraged to come to Britain from what was the empire, from the Caribbean, from India, with this amazing view of Britain. Britain had been put on a pedestal. It's kind of interesting we use that term when we talk about statues, but the whole country had been put on a pedestal through the teaching of history, again, the teaching of history and the way that history was lying to them effectively, and about patriotism and nationalism. People believed that they were English or British. They come to Britain and they're treated terribly. And the disappointment and the sadness there is, and the shock of it is palpable. And so this is a clip from a film called The Colony. I think it was the BBC film in 1964. What you find is, and what I found was when I was growing up, was that television, like I said, was my education. And I think people who were making TV at this time were clearly quite liberal, forward-thinking people who were making films about these difficult subject matters in a very sensitive way, I would say, a very sensitive way, but maybe with their eye on the future. But I think TV had a lot more gravitas then, and maybe in the 80s, people were really willing to interrogate social issues on television, which is why you have so much great material from this time that you're going to be looking at. But really, when you look at these things, they're as much about now as they are about then. And if anything, they're about now, and they're about the future of Britain as well. So this clip is quite long. It begins in a kind of weird way because you don't see anyone, but then it's actually two clips put together, and it's from the colony, and it's from 1964. It's 2 years before I was born. If we could show that, please.
I've got an uncle that traveled in this country before I came, and he said, when you come over here in England, when you got a job, go to your work regular, and don't talk too much, he said. Do as you're told. And if a white bloke been social with you, social with him. If he doesn't care for you, doesn't care for him, just take no notice. And one of the last word I'm telling you, and remember what your uncle tells you, when you go in England, try your endeavor best to remember your father.
Well, England to me, really, when I was at home, it was more or less like, you know, a land of paradise, happiness, everything that is gay, and you could live ever so comfortable without any form of misery or anything like that, you know. And I had that kind of impression more or less when I was going to school. But after advancing up in age and beginning to read books and things like that, finding out for myself that it isn't altogether the way how I thought it was. It appears now to me as if everybody has got to struggle through life so as to make the grade, if you do intend making the grade any at all. I would like to see if I can go home back someday even better off than how I did come in the country. And the only way of doing that or achieving the goal in that respect is to see if I can get myself a job and try to keep the job the best possible way. Ignore any form of ignorance that might be an embarrassment to me and things like that, because it is ordinarily said, if a man wants good, your nose has got to run.
On first coming here, we were all sort of we had our little insularities. What I have noticed nowadays is that the West Indian is no longer considering himself a Jamaican, Trinidadian, Barbadian, Kittian, Antiguan. We are subtly, but inexorably being considering ourselves as we are all colored people. Nowadays, you pass one pavement, over the other pavement, the chap waves to you. You don't know him. You're positive he don't know you. Yet he waves to you. Why? Because you have one thing in common. One thing which makes him now realize that we can wave to each other and expect to be waved in return.
So, I mean, for me, the problem with selecting a clip today was, in that film, everything was so heavy. The mood of that film is so heavy and it's so sad. I don't know whether people at the time would have thought it had been sad or just some guys talking about their lives in Britain, but just some moments from that were absolutely kind of heartbreaking. I don't know if you noticed that when he was talking in his flat with his wife and child, the pan goes round, he's actually sitting on his bed. So they're probably all living in one room. So just details like that is something, of course, that you pick up on with archive. And then another moment when you see him talking, looking very smart, sitting on his bed, well lit. And then the next shot, it's him working on the buses. And you don't, that's a very jarring edit. It's meant to be. but it's quite shocking as well, seeing him doing that when he's talking. Basically, he's talking about, he uses the word ignorance, which I think is basically racism. That's his word for racism. And of course, he's in a job where he has to deal with the public every day. Literally, he's there taking the money and probably getting abused in some way, or some strange things are going on with him. So it's really tough watching that in the way that maybe it wasn't tough at the time for some people. And the whole program is really interesting. The way that people talk, the sort of sadness and the sort of resentment, really interesting, and it explains so much, really, I'd say, about British society. So really, I mean, it's so rich, this archive, in terms of moments like that. What you find later on in the 70s is that the children those people have grow up, and then you have the sort of documentaries about youth culture, where carrying culture becomes almost the dominant youth culture, a lot of young people, and it mixes with English culture and so on. So it's that's a very interesting story. And that story about music is reflected in the story of the country. But this is sort of earlier days, you'd say, like 1964. And it's absolutely heartbreaking to watch it, I would say. So that interview, that 3 minutes, is better than any white politician talking about race, really, from that time, or the prime minister talking about an immigration bill, or all those things, because actually that's a separate experience. That's lived experience that you see there. There's this phrase that's used a lot, living history. It's used weirdly with reenactors, people that dress up as soldiers at weekends and reenact battles, and it's used a lot. And I used reenactors for when I did the miners' strike reenactment. So I got to know these people, these men, almost overwhelmingly white men, who like to dress up in historical gear and reenact battles and run around with guns and things like that. And they use the term living history, but it's not really living history. That's living history. That's history lived. That's someone going through a historical moment on the sharp end of it. And it's also, if that guy's still alive, or people from that generation are still alive, they are living history. They genuinely are people that have lived through that moment. They've seen changes, but they were there at the beginning, as it were. And so a person, in a sense, also is archive, weirdly. That's not really much use to us, but even an interview with someone from that era, an elderly person now, maybe, is a sort of form of archive when you get the memories from them. But that whole film, it's kind of a low-key film economy, but it's super heavy. It's really heavy. So that's something that struck me. The major changes in post-war Britain have been immigration and probably the loss of industry. These are the two things that have marked us as as stories that we've dealt with in some ways very badly. In some ways, it's been okay, but they're very rich ground to look at archive. If I could have the next slide. So what I would recommend you all, if you haven't already, is to watch the Adam Curtis series, which is called Can't Get You Out of My Head. It's basically 8 hours of archive from the BBC put together to make this kind of, Adam Curtis is an incredible filmmaker. He uses archive to tell stories with a voiceover, telling quite complicated stories about how different people and different movements have worked within each other, about the media, about power structures. And the latest film is kind of a tour de force. I haven't finished it yet, but there's a massive archive in there. Some of it I recognize, some of it I don't. He basically was given the whole of the BBC archive to work with to create these stories. It's very authored, but it's pure use of archive in an emotional way. It's quite hypnotic, so it's quite manipulative, but I suppose you need to be aware of that. But the stories he tells, quite complicated, but he uses archive in a way that draws you in, and then uses music on top of that to draw you in. So if I could have the next slide, it's just another still from that. So there's stories about China, about immigration into Britain, about the Black Power movement in America and in Britain, about mind control and mass media. It's very complicated, but it's basically a story told through archive. So I'd absolutely recommend that. Going back to my work, if I could have the next slide. It's a very striking image. So this is archive. It's not film, but it's archive. And in a way that, in the same way that that clip from the colony, the details were telling a story. Here, there's a story told in a photograph, and I'll show you some film to do with it in a minute. It's a photograph of maybe the other great story about Britain in the post-war era, the last 70 years. It's about how we went from being an industrial nation to being a post-industrial nation, and what that actually meant to us, the changes in society, the changes in work, in identity, especially male identity, in terms of the work you had and how you defined yourself through your work. It's hugely important. This is a photograph. It's a strange photograph, but I saw it, and it, like watching the news clip of the miners being attacked by the police, it stuck with me, and I wanted to know more about it. So if you're inquisitive about a piece of film or a photograph, that's actually a very good way to start making a film, because it means you have an interest, you have a personal connection or interest within that, a curiosity basically. So I was very curious about this photograph, not surprisingly, you could say. And basically what it is, the guy on the right, all dressed up, is the son of the guy on the left, and he hated his father. He's called Adrian Street. He's a wrestler, champion wrestler, and that's him going back home to Wales, to the pit where he used to work, to show his dad and all the people who worked in the pit what he'd made of his life. It's like a biblical epic story that he has about this return. It's like the prodigal son returning, but actually not being actually very happy about what he's done. And it's a way of him showing off his riches and his look and how amazing he is to these men who are just covered in soot and have this dirty, dangerous job that he hated. So it's a revenge photograph. But like with archive, filmed archive, this tells us a story. And as time goes on, this photograph becomes more and more emblematic and important to understand British history. I'm sure when that photograph was taken, no one thought, wow, this photograph is going to tell us about Britain in the 20th and 21st century. But actually, for me personally, again, it's my opinion. Just like a lot of Adam Curtis's film is about opinion and about an emotional reaction to something. For me, this photograph is the story, is one very major story about Britain. And that is, how did we go from that on the left, the father, to the son on the right? What is that journey? What is that story? And the story is someone entering into the world of show business and service industries and glamour, as opposed to heavy industry. So it's showing what he's doing. He's showing the changes in society on his body, literally, or with his body. And he wasn't even aware of that at the time. When I speak to him about, when I made a film with him and I spoke to him about this, and he had no idea what he was doing. He just thought he was having a go at his dad. But actually he was within himself. He was contained within himself. He was going on a journey that the whole country was going on. But he was just doing it by himself because he's like this superhero character. So this is a very important photograph. I would say it's one of the most important photographs taken in Britain in the last 50 years. It's from 1972, I think. So it's just 50 years. So I made a film about this person, Adrian. And what was great about Adrian was that he kept, like a lot of people who have a very high opinion of themselves, which he does, he kept a huge archive of his life. And that includes home movies and all his appearances on TV as a wrestler. But his home movies are very revealing because they're mainly of him walking around. He went to Africa, and you'll see some footage of that in a minute. And it just gives you the texture of a life then. That's what home movies do. They give you the texture of everyday life. And we'll see some more in a minute if we have time. But if you could just go to the next image, please. Also, the thing about Adrian was that he would, without not really knowing it, he was very interested in having a persona that was very outrageous. He's totally heterosexual, by the way, but he realized he could make money by looking outrageous, and it got more and more outrageous, his look. And if I go to the next piece of film, just if you could just still it, we'll just I'll just introduce this. I'm just going to see what the time is. Okay, well, we can watch this. It's about 4 minutes long, and this is a kind of multi-use of archive. Basically, it's 4 minutes, and it's the first 4 minutes of the film I made about him. And what I'm using is archive of TV that he was in when he was like a personality, TV when he was a wrestler, but also most importantly, really, was using archive from his home movies, which is him shooting out of an airplane. Actually, he's filming Africa, he's filming North Africa as he goes over a desert. And archive with music can be very helpful. I'll explain why. Because sometimes, even though he's done interesting things, he was actually a very difficult person to interview because he was so undisciplined, and he would talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. So actually, the use of archive with music over is a lot more articulate sometimes than people. People don't know sometimes how interesting they are, weirdly, or how important it is what they've done. He doesn't really. He knows he's great and he thinks he's amazing, but he doesn't actually know how amazing he is because of the things that he's done. So by putting music over him, and it's very dramatic music, putting dramatic music over archive, it actually lifts it and takes it to a totally different place. And what you'll see is the music I use is classical music. And it actually is basically takes the everydayness of it, the everyday nature of the footage, and it sort of transcends what it is. So if we just put the first 4 minutes, it's him, it's a kind of mix of him and archive together.
I could be a tulip, I could be a man. The only way of knowing is to catch me if you can. You may suppose what you want to suppose, but I'm a sweet transvestite with a broken nose. I've got to be royalty, my blood must be blue. I'm king of the ring and queen of it too. Have you ever seen muscles on a rose? I'm just a sweet transvestite with a broken nose. I'll kiss you or I'll kick you, that's what I like the best. I'm as tough as Marciano and as sexy as Mae West. I'm as cute as Shirley Temple and as fast as Bruce Lee. I could kill a man, eventually. If you're a he, she, or it, you'd better answer my calls. I'm like King Kong with lipstick. I'm like Fay Ray with balls. I wear mink and sable when the cold wind blows. I'm just a sweet transvestite with a broken nose. This will be somewhere in the region of the 15,000th time I've walked out in front of an audience. I'm actually making my own personal history tonight because I've wrestled in 7 different decades, 2 different centuries, 2 different millenniums. At 16 years of age, I'm walking in the ring for the first time. It was like an unbelievable dream come true. I couldn't even feel my feet touching the ground. I felt like I was walking on a cloud.
Adrian Streeter's just come back from Africa. And he's got quite a tan on him too, as colour set owners will notice probably. That is not makeup.
If I'd been born in a different age, like 1,500, 2,000 years ago, something like that, I would have been a gladiator. I would have been a Roman gladiator out of choice. Not because I was a slave and made to. That's what I would have loved to have done. And the thing is that professional wrestling, it wasn't just actually fighting somebody and bettering somebody that appealed to me as all that did, but it was dressing up to do it.
Thank you. Yes, I'm going to be very quick now. I don't have much time left. I've got a few minutes, but I'm just going to say that's a sort of poetic use of archive, where you can take liberties with it. I would argue that clip from the colony that I showed, you shouldn't really take liberties with that, because that's just pure history, and every word is interesting, every word is valuable. But when it's something like that, when you're trying to create an environment, trying to create an atmosphere from something, then footage and music obviously is very helpful. And you'll see that with the Adam Curtis, the way that he will basically hypnotize you through music and through visuals. It's quite manipulative, but that's what film is basically, isn't it? You are being manipulated when you see anything, more or less. I'm just going to do two more, just if I could just have the next image. It's going to show two things very quickly, then I'm going to do questions. If I could have that, there we go. So I did something around archive. It's not filmed archive, but it was basically to show the kind of the two versions of archive, really. I made an exhibition where I looked at dates in British history in 1972, between 1973, and they were the dates that David Bowie, the musician, was playing concerts. And what I did was I found out what the news story was on that day. So I went into news archives and found a clip or photograph from a news archive from that time. And then I got a photograph from the tour from that day. So you have these contrasts basically, and they're basically contrasts of youth. And I thought this could be a very dodgy thing to do, have these photographs of these events, these heavy historical events, then with pictures of young people enjoying themselves at concerts or in the queue for concerts. But actually, what happens a lot of the time when you look at archive is the meaning reveals itself to you in the way that it might not have done in the past. But as time goes on, the meaning actually comes out at you. It matures almost. It sounds like a cliche, but it just gets better and better. So these images, this image, for example, was not used in a newspaper because it wasn't good enough, because it was sort of out of focus. It's from Derry in Northern Ireland, because during the whole of the David Bowie tour, there was massive unrest within Northern Ireland and on the mainland. There's bombings and riots and so on. So this is tear gas, young people being tear gassed in Derry when they're sort of throwing stones at the police. And on the same day, if you could have the next image, in England, there was a tour going on and young people were enjoying themselves and were being part of this huge movement, supporting this artist and living a fantasy life through this artist. So in a way, what I didn't realize when I put all these images together, that actually this archive on both sides, as it were, in terms of the heavy news or hard news and the popular culture, popular music, was really about youth, about what you do as a young person and the effect that might have on you in your future. Because when you look at this, and when you look at that picture before, as you do with any archive, you just think, well, where are they now? What's happening now? That's why the 7-Up programs are so good. I don't know if you know that, it's following people through their lives, because you just think about those young people here, and they'll be in their 70s, 60s now, 60s, 70s, their grandparents. But what effect did that have on them? And then if you could just go back one, please, Fiona, just to the first image I showed. What effect did being in part of this have on those young people? The same age as the people in the other photograph, being part of a demonstration, being arrested, being tear gassed, whatever. How did that affect them in their later life? So these are the things that make archive just get better and better almost. Especially if it's within living memory and these people are still around, because you go back to them as well, maybe, and you go back to the archive. I think that is the end, isn't it? That's dead on one. So we can take questions.
That's really, really fantastic, Jeremy. Thank you so much. It wasn't just
Thank you.
inspiring, it was invigorating, actually. And it's a really, really good description of how effectively you marshal archive material into saying something completely new and something completely with such great heft to it. So thank you very much for that. We've got so many questions that we actually have an archive ourselves of questions. And I think I'm just going to go straight in. And
all right.
And I'll go to Mary Brennan, who has asked you, have you ever been in a situation where there was a story you wanted to tell, but you couldn't actually find the correct archive footage? What did you do?
That's wow. I might have to think about that. It's possible. It's often not that you can't find it, because the archive finds you in a way. It's that you can't use it because it's too expensive, or the person that owns it, that happens sometimes, will keep it to themselves and doesn't want anyone else to know. There's some rave footage. The sort of holy grail of rave footage is from Blackburn in the north of England, that was shot by someone and then he died. And that's what happens. Someone the tapes end up at someone's house. They don't really own it. The ownership is unclear. Someone takes them and then says, no, you can't use it. So there are problems with archive when it's sort of in the hands of people that are protecting it, but actually it means no one gets to see it. I mean, never in human history has archive been so easy to find and see, because it's all online. But it's just whether you can use that, what you find online, in a film, as it were, or in a gallery, if you don't have permissions.
That makes sense, and that really ties in actually with the next question I'm going to pick from the list here, which is from Jeannie Chin, who is asking, Jeremy, with so much technology being used nowadays, how do you think this will affect archive in the future?
Well, I mean, everyone is archiving their own lives, aren't they? And I don't know where that actually, I don't even know where that stuff goes, to be honest. I know it's somewhere. But again, never in human history have people been filming everything continually, all the time, filming themselves, filming things they see in the street. Now, the reaction now, if you see something that's interesting, is to take your phone out. It probably didn't used to be that. Maybe 10 years ago, you'd ring someone up, but now you actually just film it and you live stream it or whatever. So there's archives everywhere. I suppose what will be interesting is how we will view what we're filming now in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, in 40 years. And I suspect it will all have like an amazing value, but there is just going to be tons to go through, basically. Yeah. And that's going to be something for people to do. Probably a computer will be going through it, won't it? And sort of sorting out what people may or may not want to see. But one of the interesting comments from the young people in the film I made about rave was they were just so shocked that no one had cameras and phones at the raves, and that they felt affected people's behavior, and they made people more free. So maybe, there's good sides and bad sides to filming things, obviously. On the whole, I think it's good. I think it's great that we know about what's going on in countries where the governments wouldn't want you to know. And I think that kind of thing is incredibly important to have. Even recently, you can call that archive about when people went into the Capitol building and filmed themselves and their friends. Everyone was filming, and all that footage is part of a criminal cases now. But actually, that footage is fascinating. I don't know if any of you watched it. It's amazing when you see what people were saying and doing when they're walking through. It's so revealing. And so archive, in a way, it's not stuff that's old. It's stuff that happened last week, I would say, or yesterday even. That's archive, because it's just there. It's raw material often that you can use.
There's thinking about your talk as well. One thing I noticed, and you touched on this, is the idea of potentially manipulating the material. And I'm wondering that there's a question here which ties in with this. The question is from Willow, which says, do you think there are limits to archive footage, but also is there a danger of retelling or misinterpreting people's stories?
Well, of course, you can do anything now, can't you? I'm sure there's a position now where we can go, you can go into archive and just make people say and do things that they weren't doing in the archive. We know this, but this can be done. And I'm sure within a couple of years, everyone will be able to do that on their phone, even manipulate footage. And there definitely are ethical considerations about using archive and how you use it. There's certain archive that really, you have to be very careful, I think. Just that clip from the colony, when people are talking about certain things, you really need to hear them. You don't want to have someone talking over them or music over them. You just want the pure, raw footage, I would say. But it is ethical considerations. And then there's considerations about people who are being killed, people from war situations, you know, all kinds of things. I think there's just kind of human decency is one thing you could argue.
Yeah.
But, you know, the human voice is so interesting when you see it as well. And you can get into someone's personality and their psyche and their mood through looking at them when they're talking, like that guy in his bed sit with his wife and child. There's some disappointment, the emotion in that footage, very beautifully shot in a way, very revealing, I'd say.
Have you ever encountered any difficulties in the way in which you'd used archive footage, in that did anybody say to you afterwards, I didn't like how you used that material to tell the story that you want to tell?
No, I mean, what you get sometimes is that someone is filmed in an event and they see themselves in it and they say, why am I in your film or whatever? And but that's the archive, that's the person that shot it. It's not me, because I'm using some footage, and if they didn't get a release form and stuff like that. I've just made a film actually with interviews with people outside Parliament, people who are far right, right wing to far right, old school sort of anti-Semites, racists, so on, talking to them about Britain and Brexit. And I didn't get any permission slips to film them. I mean, they were filmed, they knew they were being filmed, but I didn't get a, what's the word? I've forgotten the word now. What is it when you get them through to do like a legal form? And so
yeah,
that makes it a clearance, basically. That makes it difficult to show that film because people are worried that they're going to be sued because those people will be unhappy they're in my film. But if I'd have asked them to sign a document, they would never have signed it because they'd have been very suspicious of this legal document. And they're suspicious and paranoid anyway. So you just have to go with the flow and talk to people. And you kind of hope that actually the importance of the footage eventually will mean that you will be able to show it because it's historical. It's not throwaway. But, you know, getting permission to sometimes is, you know, I try not to ask permission as much as I can when I'm filming. I just try and get it because people just won't give you permission. So it's probably just good to get it and just know it's there. That's probably a very bad thing to say. But
we have an interesting question here from Jack also, who is wondering, Jeremy, what are your views on colorizing black and white archive materials?
That's very interesting. That's really interesting because I'm just about to maybe have a discussion with someone about that. I think it's okay in certain situations. I didn't like it to begin with.
Yeah.
But then when you think, okay, so if the filmmaker at the time had been offered a color film or black and white film, what would they probably would have gone with color film. They would probably love to have worked with color on certain things. And there's an amazing documentary about a carnival in Bristol and St. Paul's, first carnival in sort of 1965. It's just the most incredible film. It's a little bit like The Colony. So it's like people talking about moving to Britain and what it's like, and then it has the carnival. And I just thought, if you colorize something, it makes it more contemporary and it makes people understand that this is within living memory and this is something that happened and these are real people. They're not black and white people, they're real people. And it helps, I think, in certain circumstances. Someone is doing an amazing project. They're colorizing photographs, not film, but photographs that were taken of people when they arrived at Auschwitz. That's in terrible taste. That's appalling bad taste. But I tell you, when you see a photograph of a child in color, it could be a child that you pass in the street. When you see one in black and white, you don't pass black and white people in the street. So when you see a color photograph of a child having their photograph taken, wearing the uniform in all these different poses, it absolutely brings it home to you. It makes it absolutely more real and understandable. The problem with black and white, it creates a barrier and a disconnection, and it's old-fashioned immediately. So I think in certain circumstances, I think colorization of footage is helpful if it helps us understand and it brings us closer to that moment.
Well, I guess the colorization of footage doesn't mean that the original black and white footage is going to be destroyed either. I mean, they can coexist.
And you could have a choice to watch it in either, but I think sometimes it actually brings us closer to the person speaking and makes us understand them better.
Yeah. Robin Elisa has a question, which is how do you deal There's an assumption here, so maybe you haven't dealt with this, but how do you deal with the possible underlying biases of archivists?
Well, I haven't gone that far into archive yet, but I mean, the bias you find is not in what you're looking at, it's often the voiceover. Because the voiceover is the voice of authority. Often a street scene is a street scene, but it's what's being said over it that makes you understand that that voice represents the establishment and is talking about people in a way that you wouldn't necessarily expect or want to hear. So there is that, but often what's being seen is unbiased on the whole. But of course, there's you can use documentaries in various ways to make different arguments, good and bad. But it's usually, like I said, it's usually the voiceover, the voice of the male,
Yeah,
the white male talking about other people in a way. And maybe the questions, if people are being interviewed, the questions are quite pointed. But often what you're looking at, you can't change a street scene, much as you might want to, but you can change people's opinions of it by what you're saying about the street scene. If that answers the question.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good answer. I'm conscious of our time, and
I'm happy to talk if people want to hear me. I mean, this is the easy bit, is answering questions.
I'm going to ask what essentially is an omnibus question, because loads of people have absolutely loved seeing the clips from everybody's in the place. And so the question is, where can they see it if they haven't already done so?
That's a good question. I have a Vimeo channel, and it's on that.
Okay.
And I think it's Jeremy Della, Vimeo, everybody in the place, and I think it's on that. It might even be on YouTube somewhere. But I'm of the opinion that everything should be out there. I make a number of films, and most of my films are on my Vimeo channel. For ones that aren't, is because they're too high. The files are too big to put on it. But I believe it's on my Vimeo channel. There's other kind of Vimeo channels with interviews with me and so on. But once I make a film, I just want everyone in the world to see it, more or less. So I'm quite happy for it to be out there online. But try there, and if there's a problem, you should get in contact with me, Colin, and I'll try and make a link to it somehow.
Yeah, no, that makes
sense. Because there's some great footage in it.
Yeah.
It's amazing footage, and it's like, wow, this is history. Like just someone describing how they make a song with a sampler to a news group, and this is like properly important moments for like popular culture and popular music.
That's very encouraging, I think, for everyone to hear. I think it's also probably a very good note for us just to finish up with. Jeremy, thanks a million. I mean, that was just brilliant from start to finish.
It's a pleasure.
I can just tell from the responses and the chat that it's been really invigorating for everybody.
Thank you. It's something, it's very, very close to my heart, this subject. Like I said, I was growing up watching TV, watching documentaries, watching the news, and it really told me about the world, and it really informed me in the way that my school could never do. So television is sort of my teacher, and so film and archive and documentary was my teacher, and I'm very interested in British history. I'm very interested in recent history and how we look at ourselves. It's essential, and it's so vital at the moment, because I really think our history is being sort of used against us in a way, and I think it's really important that we are aware of who we are, good and bad, and that's the way you go forward, isn't it? By understanding yourself and your country and your relationship to it. And this archive that you've selected, it has all of that within it. The brilliance of Britain and the terribleness of it, often in the same film. The brilliant, amazing music and art and culture that we've produced, and our sense of humor and the buildings, all those things, but also the sort of terrible moments in our history that we've often tried to ignore or gloss over or airbrush, as our Prime Minister would say. So it's really important that we look at archive, and as young people and filmmakers, you sort of interrogate it, and you reveal its meaning to us now, basically. That's what I think.
Thanks. And I mean, what Jeremy is referring to in terms of the archive, in case anybody was late, is that we have this project called Make Film History, which you can find information on archivesforeducation.com. And a few people have asked the question, who can use the archive material under our scheme, and it's for the material is licensed for creative reuse. by young filmmakers who are on course-related projects in schools or in higher education institutions and training schemes in the UK and Ireland. Shane, do you want to just confirm that?
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to make a final point that, you know, as Jeremy said, normally to license this material, it's really expensive, and it's just in the hands of Jeremy or Adam Curtis or these kind of, you know, professional filmmakers, if you like. But what we're trying to do with the scheme is basically open all this material up to you for free, so you can have a say in kind of how history is represented, and you can kind of create your own histories in terms of connecting your own experience of Britain today with what your parents and grandparents may have gone through, and your insights into that as a new generation of filmmakers. So that's really one of the key things that we're trying to do. So thanks again to Jeremy today for a really inspiring workshop, and to the festival and to our funders, AHRC and Irish Research Council for backing our project, and for Colin for hosting. Yeah, back to you, Colin. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for all the phenomenal questions. I couldn't get through to them because there was about 6,000. But thank you for engaging so vividly. And I'm going to hand back over to Alex from BFI Future Film Fest.
Thank you so much, Colin. Thank you, Jeremy. That was really, really inspiring. And thank you, Shane, as well, for helping us organize this. So yes, guys, do check out Make Film History when you can. And just to also answer another question that's been asked quite a bit today, is that the recording of this session will be made available. It will be uploaded to the BFI YouTube channel in a few weeks' time, hopefully in 2 or 3 weeks. We will be posting across our socials, so BFI Film Academy social channels, once all our event recordings are up. So if you just keep an eye out on those, you will know as soon as it is up. Because I know quite a few people wanted to rewatch the session. So yes, you will have an opportunity to do that, and it will be subtitled too. Just before we go, I just wanted to ask you, I know that Noel has already posted the link in the chat box, but we have put together a little survey for you to tell us what you thought of our festival. So specifically what you thought of today's event and how we can improve our online events going forward. So if you can take a couple of minutes to complete that, that would be great. You will also receive an email from Eventbrite with that survey link if you want to do it a little bit later. And next up, we have our Black Magic Design Lunchtime Live with Rebecca Godiv, who is the CEO and colorist at her post-production house, Arthur Productions. And that's over on the BFI Film Academy Instagram channel at 1:30 p.m., so 10 minutes. It's absolutely free for everyone to join. And then at 2 o'clock, we have an event for all of you who are struggling with freelancing. The event is called How to Be a Successful Freelancer in the Screen Industry. So very practical session with loads of advice, and you can still register for it. Noel will has just posted the link to the Eventbrite event page where you can register for it. Do that and join us at 2 o'clock. Thank you so much, everyone, again, and see you soon. Have a good afternoon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.